So the 37s was one of the 4 season 1 episodes that was held back for season 2.
Yes, that is correct.
Initiations was another one of them?
No, it wasn't actually. I believe it was the first episode that was filmed exclusively for the second season.
Okay, so it's not like the first 4 episodes, it's just more smattered through. Okay, that makes no sense.
No, and I think I said last week, the week before, so it was the 37s, an episode called Projections, an episode called Elogium, and I believe an episode called Twisted. Now, they're kind of interspersed, I think, throughout the first 6 or 8 episodes of season 2. So it's not like you're going to get all 4 in a row. Yeah. Now they did design the 37s to actually be the season finale, and I think that you can see that.
Yeah, I guess I can kind of see that. I feel like, especially with Prime Factors, that this theme of here is a place that could be our home and that we could make our home, but we wish to actually go back to our real home and make that like, I see that being one of the big themes of the series that could keep recurring, or a style of plot for the series, just as we'll have holodeck episodes or Kazon episodes.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that in a certain sense, the 37s is maybe them deciding to start to go away from that. I don't know. I think maybe the idea is that if you look at this episode and you say, okay, this was designed as the season finale, and for whatever reason, Paramount or UPN decided to hold back 4 episodes of the show, primarily, I assume, for budgetary reasons, because the first season, I think, did run over quite a bit. Interestingly enough, the 37s of the 4 episodes was also the only one that had any location shooting. The other 3 were bottle shows, which, as I understand, was another reason why they did not air them in order, because they didn't want to start out with the 37s and then have 3 bottle shows, because Initiations has that nice location shooting once again. So if you look at it and you say, okay, I think it would have been a better season finale than Learning Curve. Learning Curve is kind of a weird place to end the season. And I think if you look at it in terms of what is the arc of the first season.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to be 2 things. Number one, the Maquis and the Starfleet personnel becoming comfortable with each other. And I think that was pretty much resolved in Learning Curve. That seems to be where that story was going. Now, it may crop up again. Aseska is still out there, for example, but she was never really a Maquis, so that's a side issue. And then I think you can say, okay, well, the 37s is them kind of coming to terms with the idea that they don't want to just land on a planet and stay there. They want to go back to Earth or Vulcan or wherever they're from. So in that sense, I think it makes a better season finale. I don't know.
See, I disagree, because I did like Learning Curve as a season finale just because it was such a weird season finale, but it led to a feeling of, even though we started in this weird place, even though things are very fucked up and we may never get home, we're at least learning how to work together, and where, Learning Curve was basically about making the best of a bad situation, and that was a fine note to end the season on. This is something that I feel a little less strongly because I just watched the season finale and I'm just starting season 2 already, but if you give it the summer for the show to not be around, the 37s reiterates that theme of we're in space, we're lost, we desperately want to get home, but we're still going to go on that, and now that we know we're still on our journey, here's season 2. I think it works it does work to me in that sense. If it is the season finale, it does kind of make Prime Factors seem very redundant, because that episode hit a lot of similar notes.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly see that argument for the 37s in the placement of the first episode of the second season. And I certainly don't think that, I mean, I don't know that it would have played well either as the season finale or the season opener, frankly. I mean, it's not a great episode. I like the second half of it a lot better than the first half. I mean,
yes. Well,
we needed... well, we need to dispense with the Amelia Earhart stuff, because it is extremely goofy even by Star Trek standards, and Star Trek has never been a franchise that has shied away from being goofy. I mean, how are you feeling about, I mean...
Oh, God. Well, it's just... I was reminded of that, was it a season 1 TNG episode where the 1980s people got on Frozen?
The Neutral Zone, yeah.
Yeah, oh, God, that was the season finale of season 1 of the... Oh, God. Like, what I remember from the Neutral Zone is that very end, well, we're back, that never really gets followed up on, but oh god, the Texas people. This wasn't as bad as the Texas people from TNG, but I don't know. As a kid, I was really fascinated by the Amelia Earhart thing, and as an adult, I think I long got that out of my system. So there are some personal reasons why I found it a little annoying, but that's not the interesting part of the episode. The interesting parts of the episode is, what is the civilization like? They were enslaved and, broke their chains and, revolted and made a new society based on the old values of Earth, they developed along the same lines that humanity did in the Star Trek. I'm really curious to see these cities. I'm curious to meet these people. This is the really interesting thing, and it's dispensed with in a captain's log.
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem with the episode in general, is that you don't see the cities. They say they're wonderful. They say they've got a thriving human civilization that, like you said, has developed along the same lines as the Federation. Apparently, they've gotten rid of poverty and war. Okay, that seems fine. I guess you can do that sort of thing when you have 100,000 people on an entire planet. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I get why they didn't show the cities. It was designed as the season finale of a season that had gone way over budget. Caretaker was way over budget. The entire season was just very expensive. And as I understand it, the cities part of it didn't come into the script until very late in the process. So they basically had no time to even tell the art department to create a map painting of a city and come up with some sort of set that they could go to, even if it was just like the city hall.
A banquet hall scene and we're eating and it's a party. Yeah, like...
Right, and so I kind of get your point that it's a little bit of a cheat to say, wow, they've got these wonderful cities and we don't get to see them. And I guess you just kind of, it's like a radio show, essentially.
Of course, yeah. Again, it didn't bother me that much, but also the conflicts of this episode are largely, I mean, it is very Star Trek that everything is either a misunderstanding, that Amelia Earhart's navigator, I forget his name, but is...
Fred.
That Fred is just acting out of very reasonable terror, and that when he has a chance to calm down and they are able to talk him, everyone becomes reasonable. That the people who are shooting at them turn out to be just mistaken, and they believe that they're, bad. But once everybody sits down and realizes, hey, we're on the same side, everybody's great friends. Like, the conflicts felt very padded in a way. I would have preferred this to just be a hangout episode in that way. Again, either have hanging out with Amelia Earhart and we're talking about and you have a lot of great moments where Janeway and Amelia could be talking about because I really liked their interactions with each other. I think it is very true to the Janeway character that this would be one of her heroes, let's say, and that it'd be because, again, we have to deal with Star Trek believes that pop culture of 400 years ago is still very relevant, right?
I mean, I don't know that I would say that necessarily. Well, I think that I'll look at it this way. I will say that in general, if you look at the ways in which Star Trek approaches pop culture, it doesn't ever really talk about what we would consider pop culture. I mean, TNG was filled with people that listened to nothing but classical music. And jazz.
I guess that's what I guess what I'm meaning, as that, I get it's a sci-fi convention why they aren't why they aren't making references to stuff that came out in universe a couple of years prior, but and yes, it is. I don't know. Amelia Earhart just seems like a strange and distant person for Janeway to take as a hero. That said, Amelia Earhart's story and her, courage and will are certainly qualities that Janeway does exhibit and sees in herself and would have inspired her to. It's not I don't feel like I guess at the end of the day, while I do feel like many of the criticisms I would have of this episode are kind of nitpicks, because while it wasn't a great one, it wasn't a bad one, and I wouldn't say anything failed terminally in it.
No, and I mean, I actually think that the episode even will answer your criticism of that to some degree, because Paris doesn't know who Amelia Earhart is. Or
that's
Kim,
true.
I think. One of the two does, Paris or Kim, whichever one it is. They're interchangeable. I don't know. It doesn't matter. They swap each other's lines on set without telling anyone, and no one says anything about it.
On April Fools, they sit at each other's stations, and no one notices.
Yeah, they swap. They don't even change uniforms. They're just like, whatever, doesn't matter. That they don't know who Amelia Earhart is. It doesn't seem like in the 24th century that Amelia Earhart is some sort of massive hero or some sort of thing that a lot of people know about. I think I like the fact that Janeway knows who Earhart is, and that this is a personal hero of Janeway's, a personal inspiration of Janeway's. I think that one of the things that is perhaps not relevant for us to talk about in this episode particularly, or maybe it is, I don't know, is Janeway as a feminist icon. And I think it's done in a very interesting way, even in this episode, where Janeway is not someone who is stridently walking around making points about female equality. We're not talking about A League of Our Own here. What we are talking about is a show that is taking the very same approach that I think something like Captain Sisko in DS9 took, a black man in charge of a space station, where it's a non-issue in the 24th century. But because it's a non-issue, it is making the point to 20th and 21st century people that are watching this show. And I think that that's part of the reason why they pick Amelia Earhart.
Yes. That especially in Earhart's day, again, she is unquestioned. Nobody questions Earhart's competence or her ability to fly planes. She was legitimately the real thing in a way, even though she did, have some criticisms of her in her time, and probably had and legitimately had a very difficult time getting started. I mean, she didn't start off as Amelia Earhart on day one, right? She had to learn to fly a plane. Girls shouldn't fly planes, that kind of a thing. By the time,
and by girls you mean children.
Well, I'm just saying, when Amelia Earhart was young and learning to fly a plane, she would have been called a girl no matter what age, right?
Yes, that is true. Oh yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. When Janeway decides in her youth, I'm going to go into Starfleet Academy, and her career ultimately takes her to becoming a captain, she does not face that bias or those same obstacles. By the time that she is there, people just see, yes, you're very good at sciencing and you're a very good leader, so hey, you're captain now.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's and I think Amelia Earhart kind of picks up on that. Now, I don't know to what degree it's interesting to actually talk about the character of Amelia Earhart. I mean, I think the performance is fine. I don't know that it's really a person, though.
Yeah,
it's more the idea of Amelia Earhart than anything else, and the idea that she would stay behind on Voyager is very quickly dispensed with, because it would just. It would just. I mean, can you imagine a version of this show that suddenly had Amelia Earhart as a main character for the next 6 years? Like, that would be very bizarre.
I mean, it is the kind of thing where I could see a science fiction show using a character like that. I think that I'm surprised if there are no science fiction shows that have done that. All right, well, here's a historical character, and it turns out they were who disappeared mysteriously in real life, and they were abducted by aliens, and now they're on their ship. I mean, hell, Star Trek had Mark Twain on the Enterprise, right? So
yeah, that is true.
Yeah, and there is nothing to stop them from actually hiring this actress full time to be. I was not surprised when it turned out that she did not stay on Voyager. That didn't surprise me at all. I knew she wasn't going to be a main cast member, but
yeah. Now, aside from Amelia Earhart, though, I don't think that there's really much to say about the 37s. I mean, they're just a plot device essentially, and I think that Fred is obstinate, and they've got the whole thing about them taking them hostage, I guess, because the episode was running 7 minutes short.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really go anywhere. I think in some sense it goes to show you exactly how precarious Voyager's situation is, because of course he doesn't believe Janeway. Why would you?
Yeah.
It seems crazy. And then you get this whole other thing about them being kidnapped by these aliens, the Briori, that came to the Alpha Quadrant in the year 1937 and took people from Earth as slave labor. This seems incredibly labor intensive and not perhaps the best return on your investment.
Yeah, right. Especially because we're talking the Delta Quadrant to the Alpha Quadrant. You could look at real world slavery and say yes, people went to Africa, kidnapped people, and brought them to the New World. But that even as labor intensive as that journey was, this makes no sense. There are plenty of other aliens in the area but this is where it seemed like they had almost 2 episodes that they wanted to weld together somehow, but
I actually think this might have worked well as a 2-parter. I think that having the first part of the episode be the character study of Amelia Earhart discovering these frozen people from 1937, having the cliffhanger be, oh my God, there's a human civilization on this planet. And then the second part of the episode is a very in-depth examination, character study of these people wanting to stay or not, and having that internal debate. I think that could have worked.
Yeah, because
now, that's not what they did, but
the first episode being the mysteries, and if the tensions were padded out, the mystery is what drives it. And then once it's solved, because the episode doesn't really give the proper consideration either to the actiony mystery, we're being held hostage, we're being shot at, or should we give up now? Should we continue risking for our true home when we've got a fairly decent facsimile here? What is the right thing to do? Can we always... and... Again, a question which came up in Prime Factors, but which I think will come up again and again every so often through this series, because their journey is very long, and yes, maybe during Prime Factors, they're 6 months in, it's an easier question to answer. Now it's a little over a year, and they still have 74 years to go. What's going to happen in 5 years? Do we still want to continue doing this journey that may be fruitless?
I think so, because that's a good segue into my other question to you, which is that do you find it believable that at the end of the episode there is no one in that cargo bay?
It didn't surprise me that the cargo bay turns out to be open. I knew that was what was going to happen. That is the Star Trek answer to happen. And there are certain for example, Neelix, when they're asking him, "Oh, are you?" and it isn't even a question for him. Feels useful here. It's his home, especially after what we learned about his backstory. He has viewed home, but it's interesting because he has kind of made the trade. Home is an impossible goal for him to go, and this is the best, closest thing. This is the place where he is very comfortable and he's finding a use and has managed to build a life for himself and Cass. So, and again, and maybe this 2-parter version of this episode could have had these characters have arcs. I would like to see Harry Kim's full thought process from, hey, this is really nice and being on this ship kind of sucks, to, but why am I staying? Why are all these different characters choosing to stay? You could do very meaty character stuff, but since the episode really only has 5 to 10 minutes to go over this, it feels very brief.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that to some degree, I wonder about the fact that no one decided to stay. And I think it feels a little TV-ish that no one decides to stay. It doesn't feel realistic to me that not even one person said, hey, you know what? Actually, I don't want to go on the 75-year journey living on a spaceship. That's going to get real old, even if we do have a magical holodeck. So, I think it's a little bit of a cheat. However, you could make the argument that it has only been, I don't know exactly how long it's been. It's been 8 months. It's been a year. Yeah. However long it's been, they have not been living on the spaceship for that long yet. And so they may not be tired of it. Yeah, or if they still think they may be at the we know that we're beginning year 2 of 7. We know they have a long way to go. As far as anybody knows, they're a week from finding the other caretaker and getting beamed back home immediately. And I guess that's really the question, though, to me, is that because you get that. The one moment that you get is that scene between Harry Kim and B'Elanna Torres when they're talking about, would you stay? Would you stay? And they kind of say that they're both tempted to. It's a very nice place. It reminds them of home. It's the closest to home that they found so far, which completely makes sense because it's a human civilization. Yeah. But both of them obviously are not going to stay because they are senior officers and they feel a responsibility and they do want to go home. Now, also they showed them their contract and they're like, you've signed on for the rest of for another few years, so you can't leave yet. Your main cast members. But I do, the question that I always have is, Janeway has this very interesting moment where she's talking to Chakotay in her ready room about how many crew members could we lose and still be able to operate the ship? And she says, could we operate it with 70 or something like that? And I think they say they have 152 people on the ship right now. So that's essentially losing a little more than half of your crew complement.
I think they say we can't do it with any less than 100. So 50 people is about the most that,
Right. So we don't actually get to hear Janeway's announcement to the ship, which I think is also a missed opportunity, because to me, I look at this and I say, maybe no one stayed behind because Janeway didn't tell them that they could leave. Like, I don't know. It just seems weird to me that Janeway wouldn't say, okay, here's the deal, people. We have this wonderful place that we could all live. We have a minimum crew complement that we need to keep of 100 people. If more than 52 people decide to leave, we all have to stay. Make your choice based on this information.
Yeah, if a dozen people said we're going to leave, and they turn out to be, for example, a couple of the Maquis from Learning Curve who weren't really fitting in, if it's people who are, if it's not senior officers, if it's people that they could replace and retrain, and everybody else does want to stay, the implication in the Chakotay and Janeway conversation is that's not going to be a huge problem.
Right. That's kind of my point with it, is like, if maybe no one decided to stay because they were afraid that if they stayed, the ship wouldn't be able to operate. Maybe if they had that information, they, like you said, a dozen people would have stayed. I don't know. Now, obviously, it makes a more dramatic point if no one leaves, because that means that they're all very invested in this journey. It's the new it's the season ender or the new season, depending on when it's aired, and so they don't want anybody to leave because that kind of undercuts the motivation or the momentum of the show. I get that, and I think it's not necessarily a problem that no one decided to stay.
You could it is, again, we're talking about an imaginary episode, but maybe the hour-long version of this episode had the half dozen people, and maybe they even are in the cargo hold and they talk themselves out. Like, I don't know, but I guess it leads us to these little imaginative moments, but the point is that everybody is still on the Voyager by the end.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the last question I have for you before we move on to initiations is, the Briori have this technology that obviously means that they can travel very quickly to the Alpha Quadrant, because they were going there they had some sort of like intergalactic slave trade going on. So we've never heard about the Briori before. That's fine. It seems like they just kind of left and never came back. Does that seem realistic? I don't know.
Oh yeah, you get the sense that they were just finally defeated, and the episode seems to imply they're never coming back. But
so we've already got two species essentially that can essentially travel 70,000 light years, like Voyager can travel between solar systems. That means that there are at least two alien civilizations that have much, 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 much faster than light travel than Voyager or the Federation have, or that anybody in the Alpha Quadrant has, because we've never seen any other alien race, I don't believe, that has this kind of propulsion technology.
Borg, maybe?
The Borg, maybe, yeah, that's true. So in terms, but where are they from? We don't know. I mean, that they kind of found they do have the Borg in the show.
Yeah,
later.
And I remember. I remember the wasn't at some point there was a reference to Borg in the Delta Quadrant as being, is that where they are in the time of TNG? And
I think so.
I seem to remember the events of Q who spur the Borg to travel faster to the Alpha Quadrant, and so either way, I assume that they're. I mean, I'm going to put it right out there. Knowing the Borg are in Voyager, I am wondering if the way they get home is they somehow manage to use Borg technology to do. That's going to be my theory for the series. But.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah, and so I guess I don't know if it's really a question, more of an observation, but I just find it interesting that we've never had any inclination that any alien species, except for perhaps the Borg, have this sort of propulsion technology, but we've already seen two others that do. I think it's more a matter of the show wanting to show that it's possible without them necessarily being able to do it. than it is any sort of commentary on the technological abilities of the Alpha Quadrant species. I just find it interesting.
I mean, that said, it could feed back into why nobody decides to stay on the planet. I mean, there could be a line to the effect of, we've already found the remnants of 2 civilizations that have this technology, and we've been at this a year. We may strike it. Maybe we will meet some Briori. Maybe we will meet but this exists. We're seeing more evidence of this in this place.
That could certainly be, yeah. Now, I lied. The last thing I want to ask you about, because we would be remiss if we did not talk about the fact that Voyager can land.
Oh, yeah. Is that that's one of the first, if not the first time we've seen a starship land?
I think it's the first time.
We've seen them crash, but yeah, I remember.
I mean, the bird of prey in Star Trek 4 can land, but that's...
Yeah. I thought it was funny how immediately, like, how they're making such a big deal about, oh, how do we land this thing? And I was thinking, but they landed all, and realizing, no, actually, they don't. It is, I don't know if it means anything other than somebody just looked at the series and realized, due to the nature of transporters, we've never seen a starship land, and maybe it would just be cool to do that. And we can have a joke about how, even though these people are accomplished pilots, this is literally the one thing no one's ever done because you never need to.
Yeah. I mean, I think I kind of feel like the implication is that Voyager is maybe one of the first Federation starship designs that has the ability to land on a planet, because of course that's a lot of different stress and gravities and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that there's really much to say about it, but I think it's interesting that Voyager can do it. And I like the fact that they come up with this new blue alert thing that apparently is the ship is landing. So I don't know, put a seatbelt on, like whatever it is. But it's just kind of a nice moment. And I think it's something that differentiates the ship from other ships that we've seen before.
Yeah. Good old Voyager.
Good old Voyager. All right. Well, let's move on to Initiations, which I think is a better episode than the 37s.
Yeah.
But also has some problems.
Well, Nog is really weird in this episode.
Okay, so you did notice that it was Aaron Eisenberg.
Of course. Yeah. It's nice to see him getting work. The Kazon. In a lot of ways, the Kazon reminded me of original series Klingons if they had been done with 90s era world building. In other words, we are starting to see some differences between them and the Klingons. The Kazon don't seem to have as much ritualization or more religious things. They seem like a very non-religious version of Klingons. They don't really seem to have. Again, we've only seen a little bit of them so far, but I don't think that they're defined by their art and their passion in the way that the Klingons are.
Yeah. I mean, I would say so far, this episode obviously goes a long way towards differentiating the Kazon from the Klingons, and I think also telling us more about who they are, because to me, I mean, I think it's interesting that they are not one empire. I mean, we've never really seen that before in Star Trek. Alien species generally track onto polities, and that's just how things go in Star Trek. And so the Kazon are one of the only alien races that we've ever encountered in Star Trek that are spacefaring, that also have different sects. And so I think that's interesting. It makes them more paranoid. It makes them more combative. It perhaps makes them out to be less powerful than they otherwise would be. I don't know. And
I mean, there's a couple of weirdly telling lines in here. Like at one point they ask how they say, what's your territory? Maps are useless. The territory changes every day. Okay, well, how many groups of you are there? Right now it's 18, but that changes all the time too. Like, this chaos is horrible. I mean, this is something that would never... Klingons are fighting against each other all the time, but I can't see them handling this amount of chaos in their life.
Yeah, it's true. And I you know, we don't know as much about the Kazon as perhaps we would like to, but it seems to me that we find out in this episode that the Kazon and this species called the Trabe had shared a homeworld. Now, we don't know if the Kazon and the Trabe both evolved on this planet, or if the Kazon were brought there, if the Trabe were brought there. We don't really know.
Yeah, wasn't that mentioned in the very pilot? I think that they had destroyed the other people in their homeworld or something.
I think so. They briefly mentioned it. They didn't kind of they gave a little bit more information about it in this episode, including the sort of rebellion and the name of the species. And so maybe the Kazon don't have a world they live on. It seems like maybe all the Kazon are spacefaring and they live in space. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe you even get the sense that can't you picture humanity going this route? I mean, getting very divided country-wise. Every country has its own space, or region has its own space program, and they will have their own colonies, and it will be, we're going to all probably try and colonize Mars together, but then once that's done, we will assumedly have the tech to pick a planet and go for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I don't think that's too far off from how things are right now. Now, in terms of the Kazon, though, I mean, I think that we don't really get a sense of what the other Kazon sects are like. We know that there's the Nistrum, which I think are the ones that we've seen in previous episodes of the show. We also have the Ogla, which are the ones that we see in this episode. And then we have the Relora, which is another sect that we don't see. And they say that there's 18 sects. They say that they kind of go all over the place. And, I mentioned very, very early on in the Voyager podcast that the initial conception of the Kazon was that they were going to be some sort of analog or commentary on the gangs of Los Angeles.
Huh.
And I guess you can kind of see that in this episode, where the idea that the Kazon don't really have territorial maps because they are essentially gangs. They are not actually polities. They are not any sort of empire. And so their territorial claims will change depending on how they're feeling that day and what they need. And they seem to be fighting internally a lot, externally a lot, both in terms of the Kazon and in terms of other species. And, I don't know where they're going to go with that, but I don't know that they use it very well in this episode either.
Well, I was about to say, one of my questions is, so I do like the makeup work on the Kazon. I like their weird hair stuff. I think it's a nice design, but we have seen at least two groups of them, and is there any differentiation? So in other words, there's no physical differentiation. It's not like they're different species or races within they don't even seem to have different fashion styles or anything like that. How do we know? Is there any visual shorthand that I've just missed for what one Kazon, what is the term? Tribe, group?
Sect, I think they call them.
Is there any shorthand indication for what sect a Kazon belongs to, or does it not really matter and it's just whatever the episode says?
I think it's the color of the handkerchief they keep in their back pocket.
No, that just says whether they.
That says whether the top or bottom or fist. Yeah, I know. No, I don't know. I don't know if there is, and I think that might be a failing on the part of the show not to do that. Then again, I don't know that much about gangs, so I don't know if gangs. I mean, I think gangs have colors. Okay. I sound really white right now. I apologize, but
no. But I mean, even in any show I've ever seen with gang stuff has at least done some television stuff to differentiate, again, for the benefit of the audience, at least. I feel like they don't have to be accurate to that part if they're trying to give information to the viewer. I don't know.
Well, maybe that's part of the point of the Kazon then, is that, why do gangs exist? Why do different gangs exist? Well, different gangs exist because in impoverished areas of cities in America, when people don't have a lot of things, they don't have a lot of material possessions, they don't have a lot of opportunities, they get very insular, they try and protect what they have, it becomes smaller and smaller. It makes sense, right? And so in terms of the Kazon, I think maybe they're making a commentary on that, where the Kazon really aren't that different from each other. They don't even really seem to have any sort of external indicators of who they are. Things change all the time. It's very chaotic. They're killing each other. They're getting into fights. It's a very sort of hand-to-mouth culture, it seems like. And that might just be the point that they're trying to make, that the Kazon are doing this for no real reason, and it's a shame that they don't just band together and become like the Federation.
And obviously what is happening for these sects to appear is a particularly ambitious Kazon decides to start his own kind of a thing, is I assume what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that would be the case, where a Kazon Maj, I think they call them, just go off and steal a ship or whatever, and then they've got a new sect. That seems reasonable to me.
Well, again, Nog in this episode, you can see him splitting off and forming his own group someday, maybe. Yeah.
It's possible, certainly, yeah. And I mean, I don't know, aside from that, I think that Initiations is a really interesting episode because it's the first Chakotay episode we've had.
Yeah.
How you feeling about Chakotay? Do you feel like you know him better now?
A little better, yeah. I think it is very in line with everything that we've seen him doing, which is that Chakotay will try to do the right. Chakotay is very lawfully aligned, and he has very extraordinarily strong principles, and he is going to follow through them, even though it may not be the best idea. He would. In other words, you may not necessarily see Tuvok grabbing Nog and be like, "Come on, we're getting out of here. We'll figure this out." But that is something definitely Chakotay would want to do, and yet at the same time, he is, because of his background, very comfortable in dangerous, fucked up situations, in situations where there is a lot of jockeying for power. Chakotay is usually very good at figuring out when. In other words, and this is another learning curve moment, sometimes you just need to punch a dude in the face in order he's good in those kind of situations too. He would probably do well on a Klingon ship. In a way, he and Riker probably have a lot in common in that way.
I actually think that's a good point. Yeah, I think that Chakotay is someone who you're right, could do well on a Klingon ship. He's someone who's very adaptable. I think it's interesting. I like him in this episode a lot because he comes across as very gentle. He comes across as very life-affirming. I think that obviously comes from his spirituality, which we will talk about, because I have some information for all of you that if you did not know this, and I didn't know
I know what it is.
Yeah, I told Richard about it, and we'll get to it in a minute. It's a good opportunity for us to finally talk about it because this episode does feature Chakotay's Indian spirituality, quote unquote, quite a bit.
Yeah.
That he's a very spiritual person. He is someone who is very peaceful. He is someone who does not he does not suffer violence very easily. He's not someone who is interested in inflicting pain for the sake of inflicting pain. And I think you see that in his disabling of the ship, beaming a car over, all of these things, right? I think that it works. I think that Chakotay is interesting. I don't know why he would have joined the Maquis, but it makes it seem more maybe not a desperate attempt to do something, but he seems like it might have been a last-ditch effort. I don't know.
I again, Chakotay is somebody who wants to do the right thing and who is comfortable with violence if it is the last resort and the only resort. And again, I think in terms of the Maquis, he was probably working more towards defending and supplies and stuff like that rather than... I mean, he wasn't going on raids towards the Cardassians, and he wasn't plotting against the Federation, and he was definitely trying to make all sides happy. I mean, we've met Maquis people who were more willing to work with the Federation, who lamented the fact that they and the Federation didn't agree anymore, as well as we've met people who are like, oh, this stupid Federation's not doing enough for us, and, whatever, fuck them. Chakotay is definitely in the first category, and I think... I mean, you very much get the sense that if he had stayed with Starfleet, he would be the first officer by now anyway, and there is almost a sense of the universe writing itself, in that he is able to he gets in this weird position where he has the Starfleet career he ought to have had, because this is the Starfleet career he is demonstrating that he deserves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two things there, obviously. The number one is that Chakotay has a very defined moral center and a moral code for himself, but he also, in this episode, when he's talking to Carr about the Federation and the uniform and how it's very similar to the ways in which the Kazon get their names, but it's a different process, obviously, because the Kazon have to murder somebody, and in the Federation, you have to go to Starfleet Academy and do a lot of learning and tests and training, and you don't just get handed a uniform when you're born.
So in other words, the Starfleet has it harder, is basically what he's saying.
Basically, yeah. But I think that scene is really key to me, because it shows that Chakotay still identifies very strongly with Starfleet and very strongly with the Federation. And he did not talk about being a Maquis with Carr at all. Now, partly he didn't talk about it because that would confuse the hell out of Carr. And what does Carr know about the internal politics of the Federation? But it's also a very, very striking moment, because it means that Chakotay has come around to the Starfleet side, and that perhaps he did not leave Starfleet willingly or at least easily. It seems like, again, he's a very gentle person. He's someone who understands Starfleet rules and regulations and the procedures very well, the morality, the code of Starfleet and the Federation. Yeah. And that for him, what was going on in the demilitarized zone with the Cardassians and the Federation was a moral calling for him to do something about.
Yeah, so, in other words, Starfleet was the one who was failing to live up to their obligations. We've seen that attitude in several people in DS9 already, but I think Chakotay could have the case from his point of view that I was the one who was doing everything right, and it was the officers at Starfleet who were doing the wrong thing, who are committing these sins of omission. And as hard as it was to leave, I had to follow the conscience. And now he is with a commander and now he is with a captain that he feels it does exemplify the values of Starfleet in a way that he can follow.
Yeah, I think that's right, because the other thing that always strikes me about Chakotay is that we've seen a lot of other Maquis members, both in Voyager and in Deep Space Nine, and in TNG for that matter. And I think for most of them, they had a deep core of anger that you don't see in Chakotay.
Yeah.
I mean, think to Eddington or Cal from the two-parter, the Maquis from DS9, or think even of someone like Ensign Rowe, who always had this sort of core of anger that was barely contained. And Chakotay doesn't have that. He doesn't seem to... Not that he's not capable of anger, but
I think he's more like the old guy in Ensign Rowe's episode, who is very much a community leader. He's dealing with supplies. He is doing the right thing, even though it is beyond the bounds of the law, and it is like he has more in common with that. It's true.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and it's a good opportunity for the show to flesh out Chakotay's character, I think, because this episode tells us a lot more about who he is than any of the other episodes of the show has so far.
Well, it is good that we have a show that's somebody's episode where they are the focus of their own episode. I was worried that the show would elide Chakotay a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that's not an unwarranted fear. I'll just leave it at that. Now, we would be remiss if we did not deal with the Native American stuff. So this is an interesting story. I had always kind of been very, very confused by Chakotay's generic Indian tribe spirituality beliefs, practices, and I didn't really understand why. I thought, okay, here is a Star Trek show that is very committed to showing the diversity in human cultures, showing the diversity in alien cultures, and is going to have a Native American, American Indian character in the show as a main character. That's very interesting to me. But then why would they not do their homework and have the character of Chakotay be a member of an actual tribe, do the research, have his beliefs, his practices, his spirituality be actually related to that tribe, right?
See, on the one hand, not to interrupt too much, I can sort of... The argument in favor of making it a little more syncretic and more ambiguous would be because...
Is to be racist?
Well, yes, to be racist. I don't know. Is it maybe this is just asking a question as a devil's advocate, but if you have just a more general spirituality or culture that is based on a few things which could accommodate for, number one, countries aren't as important in the Star Trek universe and in the Federation as they are in our world now, and so you could see the divisions melding, it's shifting a little bit, especially over the course of hundreds of years, and also so that you can make changes such as, for example, this device that he has, which is essentially technological peyote, right? You can invent that kind of a detail into a science fiction universe, but without actually touching the traditions that it is. In other words, if you're putting technological solutions to Navajo rituals, that is a little more disrespectful towards the Navajo than if it's diluted a bit by making it more. I don't know. Is that a bullshit line?
I think it is, and I think it is for two reasons. Number one is what I will say in a minute. Where I was going. The other thing is that I think that you could get away with that if American culture for 600 years had not systematically ignored, destroyed, committed genocide on Native American culture, people, lands, everything, right? I think that there's an ignorance to the native peoples of America that you don't see even in places like Australia or Canada. And I think that if you had a character who was born in what we would consider to be Italy, right, who said, I'm European, and they were generic and they ate baguettes, and they, I think you could do that because there is an understanding of what it means to be Italian, of what it means to be Spanish, of what it means to be Croatian, of what it means to be English. That says, oh, look at this. Okay, we had these different groups, these different tribes, to use a Native American terminology, that slowly came together in a more European understanding. And that is not born out of a place of racism or ignorance. That's born out of a place of the optimism of Star Trek. Whereas,
and out of a place of somebody who is Italian and eating baguettes and walking along the Thames as somebody who is going to come off as very cosmopolitan and very well-traveled.
Yes, whereas with Chakotay, it just comes across as lazy and uninformed because Americans don't know anything about different American Indian cultures to a large degree. And the other reason, of course, is that that's exactly what happened, is that apparently Star Trek Voyager hired a quote-unquote Native American expert who was a fraud and who did not know anything about Native American cultures, did not know anything about the different tribes.
Was he Native American himself?
No, he lied about being an Indian, apparently.
So this isn't even like, hiring me as a Catholic expert and I've forgotten half of the stuff and I am not an authority, but I can vaguely claim it. This is like me claiming to be a Native American expert, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. And so that is precisely the reason why the character of Chakotay is so weird.
When did they find that out?
I don't know. I don't know if they ever did. I have never heard anybody involved in the production of Star Trek Voyager that has said one word about it. So
yeah, because you'd think if it was during the course of the show, they would have fired and found somebody else. Frankly, that
you would think so. Well, to a certain degree, though, at some point it becomes a impossibility to fix, though, because you've got Chakotay saying things like Pakra, you've got him saying things like Hakuchi Moya. Like, I don't know if that's even real. Who the hell knows? I mean, that could be like Haagen-Dazs. I don't know. But that's the problem, is that Chakotay's belief system seems very schizophrenic because it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not blaming the production staff of Star Trek Voyager necessarily. Although,
I mean, they should have done a background check. They could have read his CV and called the university he was associated with, right?
Yeah, like apparently even at the time in 1994, 1995 that they were developing these characters, I think the guy had already been revealed as a fraud. Now, of course, you can make the argument that, the internet did not exist in the same form that it did today. It was not ubiquitous, and that people did not have the kind of access to information and the kind of access to vetting that people do now. It was a lot harder to do that kind of research, but they should have still done it.
I mean, I also feel like this is probably a relatively narrow field, too, so it's... Native American consulting is probably a small enough field where a lot of people do know each other, and you probably could get your references done pretty easily. I don't know. It did. I wasn't there, but it does seem like laziness on their part.
Yeah, it seems a little problematic. Well, aside from that, is there anything else to say about Initiations? I think it's a strong Chakotay episode. I think that it develops the Kazon a little bit more. The rest of the characters... Yeah, no, go ahead.
The one thing I have to... This is the second time that... Now, of course, the initial plan that Chakotay comes up with, you're going to shoot me, they'll see that you killed me, and that turns out to not be the case. He turns on the guy who was being an asshole to him and is like, all right, I just earned my name, which is answering the... I mean, Chakotay comes with a Federation solution. He comes up with a Kazon solution, and I do like that. But the TNG version of this episode would have involved all of these illusions and tricks and stuff. I mean, the Federation is much more technologically advanced than the Kazon to make it look like he had killed him. In Voyager, Chakotay is saying, no, you're actually going to kill me. They're going to transport me and revive me. And which is the second time in this series that a plan has revolved around, you're going to actually kill me and then revive me in sickbay because we can do that. I think that's not, number one, it speaks to the technological advancement of the Doctor, of all of that, but also makes the Voyager crew a little more badass in a way because they are so committed to this plan that they could fucking die if that's the best way to get through it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point, actually. Yeah. I mean, and also that I think that they have just this confidence in the Doctor's ability to pull this off. I mean, he's already done it twice. I mean, with the woman from Emanations and from Kim. So he's created a holographic lung for Neelix. I mean, he seems like he's a pretty good doctor. So
no, and which also says to the Doctor, because again, at first he was having a little trouble getting integrated into the crew, and by this point they have this trust in him. They know him, he's an actual person. He's gotten over that particular hump.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. All right, is there anything else to say about initiations?
No, thank you.
All right, well, if you have any thoughts on either of the episodes of Star Trek Voyager we just watched, please leave a comment on the post for this episode of the podcast at trekaboutshow.com. You can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/trekaboutshow, which is a way for you to donate monthly to the podcast if you are enjoying it. Please go do that, patreon.com/trekaboutshow. Also supports our other podcast, Tuning In. We are almost at the end of the first season of The X-Files, so it's still a good time to jump into that. This week we're talking about the episodes Tombs and Born Again. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we are there. Trekabout Show is our username in all those places. And as always, please leave us a positive iTunes review for Trekabout. It is the best way for new people to find the show. Next week, we are going to be talking about the Star Trek Voyager episodes, Projections and Elogium.
Oh, at least one of those is one of the season 1 episodes.
I think both of them are.
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy.